So actually our introduction is within the slides, so I'll just start off now. Okay, good afternoon. Fact, the CEO of British Petroleum in 2013 earned $8.5 million in stock options and cash, while the average worker earned only $43,000. Fact, in the tobacco industry, the CEO of Vector Group Limited earns $9,500 per hour, when the farmer who harvests the tobacco earns only $9 per hour. Perhaps you can think about a CEO whom you used to work for and compare his or her earnings with yours. Did you even know how much he or she earned? And even if you did know, was it fair? What is fair and what is reasonable? Today, one of the main questions that we want to answer is, are current CEO compensation structures ethically justified? Why have such large CEO pay? Do they really work? Today, as HKUST MBA representatives, these are the ethical issues that we want to discuss today. So first off, we'll take you through the executive summary, and we'll have a general overview of CEO compensation, and we will talk about your company, Vector Group Limited, and its performances. And then we will provide our recommendations and implementations, and then finally we'll have a recap and a Q&A session at the end. So first off, this is our group here, and we come from Canada, Korea, China, and India. And we have professional working experience in mining, construction, project management, and financial services. And we are here in the US, and we're very excited to address these ethical issues and provide our recommendations to the board of directors. So first off, the real ethical problem is not how much CEOs are paid, but how their compensation is structured. Vector Group's current CEO compensation structure poses a threat to the long-term interests of all stakeholders. So what we propose is we will recommend a compensation and pay structure that incorporates ESG, strict performance management, and debt structure that reflects the interests of all stakeholders. So the overview of CEO compensation, what are they and why have them? We will also talk about the intended and unintended consequences, and what is the problem with them overall. So basically, it is known as a combination of base salary, stock options, cash bonuses, and usually awarded at the end of the fiscal year. And what is it made to do? Well, to attract the best of the best. And also it's to incentivize executives to maximize profit for the organization and align interests with shareholders. So that is the belief that we all know. So we have these intended consequences. The intention is to align these interests, maximize profit, attract the best of the best. However, we must also consider what happens on the other side, the unintentions. Basically, what we can witness is a decrease in morale, right? Most employees work long and hard, right? And they bring value to the organization, just like what the CEO does. And this inequality in payment and earnings, it creates distance between the CEO and employees, right? And this can be poisonous to the organization. And what we can see in the corporate world is, well, stock incentives can encourage unethical actions just to prop up stock prices. In the preparation of the annual report, CEOs may want to delay liabilities or maybe inflate revenues just a little bit just to meet analysts' forecasts and expectations. And we can see this in the corporate world a lot. And so we will go even deeper, and Vasu will talk about what is the issue with CEO pay.
Thank you, Jonathan. So what we're trying to discuss here is really from a principle point of view, a philosophical point of view, as well as an empirical analysis into how these compensation structures work. And what are really the main questions or the main arguments or critiques of the current compensation structure, especially within the United States? Because the government regulations have tried their hardest, specifically where, say, the Companies Act of 2006, where they've tried to make sure that public knowledge is made aware, public is made aware of what CEOs are compensated, and they're trying to align those interests. But the basic theory that this is all based on is, of course, the agency theory. All right, sorry about that. I'm going to be freezing now. So the agency theory is what underlies the payment structure currently within the United States. And the basis of that is essentially that we're trying to align the shareholders' interests with those of the agents of the corporation, essentially the CXO level of the organization. But the number of critiques that have come in, essentially three questions. Is CEO pay unreasonable on its face based on its gross magnitude? What about comparative magnitude? Does the high CEO pay violate the principles of justice and fairness? And finally, does this incentive structure actually work? Do we actually see pay for performance really improving these organizations, especially with CEOs on average spending about 3-4 years within an organization? And that's already happening with Vector Group. So let's get into these topics one by one. As we can see from this graph, this is a Harvard article that was done on the S&P 500 CEOs. The median salary has been gradually increasing since 2010 at a rate of about 3 to 6%. Now, a lot of this has also been due to backlash from society regarding the CEO payments. A lot of companies have taken it upon themselves to ethically try and mediate this thin line between what society wants and what's the best thing for the organization. But we have to delve deeper into what really is a magnitude of the CEO. What is justifiable? How is something, for example, is 10 million US dollars excessive? Is it too less? What about 500,000? How do you define magnitude? It's very difficult for someone to do. It's essentially based on their frame of reference. So for example, I come from India. It's one of the poorer countries in the world, but it's developing. But even there, a salary of 1 million USD is comparatively a lot higher than say 10 million USD within the US. So your frame of reference changes as you go across countries and as you go across cultures. And that is really defined within the next graph that we see. And this is about the comparative magnitude, about how people view what is, in their own mind, a fair estimation of what a CEO should receive. So again, this was an article where they had done a survey on different cultures and countries and asked them a simple question. What do you think is the ratio between an unskilled worker and CEO in terms of their pay? What do you think it should be? And then they let them know what the actual estimate is. So within this graph, we can see that specifically within the United States, it's extremely skewed. In other countries as well, there are certain closer ranges. If you look at Denmark specifically, the ideal ratio in their minds is actually 2, which is still relatively low compared to every other country. But in actuality, they follow about 48. If you look at some of the other bigger economies within the world, for example, the United Kingdom, ideal is 5.3, they're looking at 84. Within the United States, most of the public believes that it should be around 7. It's actually around 350. It used to be 100 to 1. About 20 years ago, but that has just steadily increased and increased. And it's because of a number of reasons we'll be getting into later. But this essentially, what it does is, it's showing you how the public views it. But again, when we try to look at it empirically, you're looking at de facto justifiability of how much is a ratio that should be paid out to the person. If I could give you an example, let's look at something like how much should, say, a taxi driver be paid versus a doctor, or a teacher versus a professor. These are intricacies that you cannot really delve into because that's how skills as well as the talent within that job is judged. But what you can look at is an average median within these. So again, there's no real answers within these two. We feel that these are, again, ethical dilemmas that can be argued for and against. But there are 2 points that we really need to discuss where we feel that the current structure really fails. And that's fairness of distribution. So people care deeply about fairness. This was a study done by Guth in 1982. The ultimate game experiment, I don't know if any of you have heard of this. I'm assuming from your smiles maybe you have. But there's a scenario where 2 people are given, they're put in a situation where one has to propose how a certain amount of money is to be split between the 2. And if the person receiving or the person who's receiving that offer agrees, it's split. If he disagrees, both of them get 0. In many situations when it's skewed towards a proposer, the person says outrightly no, and neither gets it. This is against rational thinking. You'd rather get $1 versus 0. But what we notice is that participants actually are willing to punish those perceived as acting unfairly. And this exists within our mindsets as individuals. And this exists in companies as well. The implication is that as the government has made regulations to let the lower level managers and everyone know how much the CEOs are being paid, this has an adverse effect on them, as they know exactly how much they're being underpaid to the higher levels within their organization. And this can have an effect on the culture and performance of the company. Finally, does it really work? The agency theory is based on that monetary gain be a long-term vision for the company. And essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to link their performance with the stock of the company and hope that they do what's in the best interest of them. But many studies have shown evidence to the contrary. There's an ambiguous relationship with the firm performance that rewards these executives sometimes for pure luck. It's how the markets goes. There's a gap theory which basically states it's investment sentiment that really drives your stock price. This is not really what the CEO does on the ground. You have high CEO incentive pay or prerequisites which have in many cases decreased the firm's performance purely because they've tried to extort as much value as they could out of these payments. And finally, this system, because it's based, as Jonathan mentioned, at the end of the year, essentially on your K10 earnings, there's a lot of opportunities for an individual to then take certain parts which might not exactly align with the interests of the organization or the stakeholders that are involved. Certain examples are given here. Within this study itself, Harris and Bromley, a firm that pays over 92% of the total CEO compensation in stock options has nearly a 40% chance of grounding restatements in a subsequent 10-year period. I mean, that's incredibly high odds, and this has effects not just in the short term, but long term, even on your operational profitability going down the line. So finally, what we've seen is that in the traditional theory, the focus is on the stakeholders and the company. But this does not take society into consideration or societal effects into consideration. How a company works autonomously is very different to how it works within society or community. So there are certain stakeholders that need to be taken into consideration, and we've identified 3 more that really need a say, or at least have some effect on how the company's pay should be. And those are the government, society, and employees. Now, Tony's going to take you through the situation right now in Vector Group and how these theories or practices are affecting the compensation structure and the company's performance, and finally we'll recommend some implementations.
Thank you, Wesley. So Vector Group, just a quick recap. Vector Group is a tobacco company. It manufactures and sells discount tobacco in the US market. So it focuses on the discount tobacco market, which is very cheap cigarettes, and only because that it has some cost advantage over the other competitors. For the last 100 years, since the company was founded in 1911, the company has been a small player in the market. But in the last 2 years, it become topic of media because first of all, its stock price jumped like 26%. And then it announced a 7% dividend payout ratio, which is very attractive to investors. And also, its CEOs granted 1.2 million shares, which was at that time 22 million. And why is that? The only reason is that the company at the beginning of 2014 increased its investment in Douglas Element, which is a real estate broker operates its renting and the selling of houses in New York City area as well as other major cities such as Miami. So this is what happened to this company. This is story till now, but is it a really good story? So if we put history into perspective, we will say that there are 3 major drivers of the company's business. The first one happens in the 1998. The company take advantage of an agreement called MSA, which is simply saying that to encourage the competition in the tobacco company, those small players in the company, they can have some tax benefit from the government. So taking advantage of this opportunity, the company entered into the discount tobacco industry. And then it acquired a company called Madeline, which is also a discount tobacco company. And this paved way for the company to build its own brand called Eagle 20s and the Pyramid. And this drives the growth in the last several years. And this make the company a very, very stable company to invest because it has very stable dividend payout ratio, and most of investors are very prudent and they like the company's transparent or straightforward business model, and they expecting a steady return from the stock. And what happened after the acquisition of the Douglas Elliman is that now the company become one of the heated topic in the market. And it's no longer a tobacco company actually, it's now more like a real estate dealer or a broker company, which is much more riskier than tobacco company. And that is a good thing actually. We are willing to look at the change of the company, and it's always good to diversify your business. However, what we are worried about is you look at stock performance in the last couple months. The company stock price drops. And drop below in both the the green one is the SP50 tobacco index, and the other competitors, for example, Philip Morris, as well as the Renault American. So the things like, although the Element's revenue keep growth and as it used to be, but the performance on the tobacco business dropped, and that hits the market, and that is all this problem altogether, and we think with the 30-minute payment of the CEO, this is a problem. So here again, we are now seeing that, let's first like how big is the 30 minute? So 30-minute payment is like on average 2 times of the US CEO's payment. Also, it's like 3 times of the peer corporates in the tobacco industry in the US. Globally. Also, compared to the Vector Group, it's like 841 times of the average workers, also like 9,000 times, as Jonathan mentioned, of the labor worker in the tobacco industry, which is very, very big gap. So still, I'm not saying that the CEO, his name is Howard Lorber, he himself does not worth the pay or not. He himself is a celebrity in the industry. Also, he did a great job in investing in Douglas. What I'm trying to say is that is the current package, the current compensation structure really represents the best interest of the shareholders. So if you look at from the view of this structure, yes, it covers a lot of points. For example, it incentive the CEO to think of some strategy for the company's business. Also, like make CEO like have the company perform well, and this package can attract top of the top CEOs for sure. However, there are something was not covered. For example, the organic growth of the company. What is the company in 10 years, 20 years, right? And how about the company's culture inside the company? The fairness between employment, also the fairness, the welfare of the employees. Also, how's the company relationship with the society? Does the compensation help the company to really fit back to society? So that's what we are saying here, is that this structure is not justified. For 3 reasons. It's like, so first of all, we see no sign of organic growth. Here I will address that there is a product called e-cigarette in this market, and the company has invested a lot of money to develop this e-cigarette. However, because it does not help the company to perform well in the stock market, so the company is trying to sell this market, this business, which is a waste of its future opportunity as well as a ton of investment it already has made. So and also this makes the company diversify into totally another business, which is real estate, totally different from tobacco. And third is that we think there is a long-term risk to all stakeholders. So first of all, if you tie in the compensation together with stock option, as a lot of research has already prevailed, that it will raise a lot of ethical problems. The CEOs, the company CEOs, they will do their best to make the stock price go high because the package itself is really an irresistible temptation to them. If you could recall the case of Aaron, which was the biggest scandal in the business history. These two companies are quite similar. They are all the darling company of the Wall Street, and they are all hiring the top executives in the market. Also, they have very well structured compensation. But what happened to Aaron? It ended up with that the CEO trying to keep his stock price going high, manipulate the financials, and that made the company like disappear from nowadays business. And also, as I have mentioned, this kind of compensation will distract the company from its organic growth opportunity. If you think of the product portfolio, like the BCG matrix, the company, you need a cash cow, you need a stock, you need a star, right? You need a cash cow to sustain your current business, you need a star business in the future. But in this business, we are thinking about maybe e-cigarette could be a star, but now they gave it up only because it doesn't contribute to stock price. And then lastly, all these pressures goes to the board of directors. How can you investigate? How can you monitor? How can you make sure that the company really can go well under this kind of payment structure? I'll pass it to Chang. Thank you.
So, my colleagues previously mentioned that current compensation structure poses threat to some of the stakeholders, and we want to ensure that the new compensation structure will reflect the interest of all parties. So what we recommend will cover the ethical, legal, and financial ground, along with the long-term values of stakeholders and company. So how we are going to do, what we want to do is that ethically and legal basis, we recommend Vector to link the ESG parameters to the CEO compensation package, along with having stricter performance measurement. And financially, we'd like to suggest them to have a long vesting period of at least 5 years. And also we recommend them to restructure CEO compensation package by incorporating that equity and corporate bonds into the CEO incentives. So now, how we are going to implement this? So first, let's go on the ESG implementation. ESG is becoming more and more important to the corporate world nowadays, and which can bring great benefits and long-term benefits to not only the stakeholders but also the companies as well. But according to the studies in 2014 done by a non-profit organization called CERS, only 7% of American corporations were linking ESG parameters to the CEO compensation package. So we see there's a great opportunity for Vector to implement the ESG into the CEO compensation package, which will bring greater impact to stakeholders, society, and companies. So first, let's look at the environmental issue, which is becoming a growing concern all over the world at the moment. Such as issues like carbon emission, lack of management of resources in water and energy, and toxic materials. So what we recommend is to, under the environmental KPI, we recommend to consider emission and resource management under that. So giving 40%, distributing 40% of the scale to emission and then 60% to the resource management. And as there have been many regulations and laws on the environmental issues, specifically on carbon emission, we see that by implementing this ESG matrix, the company Vector can achieve both ethical ground on environmental issue, but at the same time, their legal compliance will improve as well. And also, if you look at financial side, let's look at resource management. When the company more efficiently use its resources such as water and energy, it will also reduce the operating cost of the company. So it's not just an ethical and legal ground, but in terms of financially, it can be very beneficial for long run as well. Move on to the social matrix. We recommend our three major metrics would be employment, operation, and community, distributing 40% on employment, 40% on operation, and 20% on community. So under the employment matrix, we suggest the CEO to look after the general well-being of the employees, such as health and safety and working condition of the employees. At the same time, we want to make sure the company encourages equal opportunities among the employees in gender, whether it's like a racial issue or disability. And lastly, encourage them to develop and train themselves for their career progress. An operation healthy and the healthy operation is important for the sustainability of the company. And also, there are many many laws and policies bound to the operation. So one of the most important issues is the having transparency in the supply chain management without any fraud, slavery, or any corruption. And also the health and safety of employees come into effect on operations as well. And lastly, community is very important for the companies to sustain for the long run. When the community has a strong and sound economy going on by having great employment opportunities and with the collaboration of the local vendors, that will also benefit the company in overall as well. And the last piece of the ESG is governance, which is where the policies and decisions on CEO compensation are made, and it is also the place where the ESG, the issue that I previously mentioned, environment and social issues are also finalized as well. So it is very important for the board of directors and shareholders to act proactively on the policies on the ESG and then CEO compensation evaluation. And which I'm going to mention here would be the having stricter performance management of the CEO, which can be directly influenced by the involvement of the corporate governance. So one of the reasons why CEOs walk away with a hefty bonus is because they sometimes tend to have easy goals which are not really aligning with the long-term goals of the company, but also is mainly driven by self-interest. So to avoid these issues, it is important that the board of directors, after the review of the goals, the board of directors should always review and revise the goals with the CEO. So let's say if the CEO achieved the goal, CEO surpassed his goals by a large margin in the previous year, the board of directors should sit down with the CEO and should revise and some of the goals and the metrics and make them not only more challenging, but also make sure the goals are aligning with the interest of the stakeholders and ESG as well. So let's look at the financial side. So one of the root causes that we mentioned about the stock-based incentive, and one of the root causes that the CEOs behavior on the CEOs are risk-taking behavior unnecessarily is because of the CEOs incentives are mainly tied to cash and stock. And so, and then it will rebound the creditors, which are also important aspect of the finance of the company as well. So by incorporating that equity and corporate bonds into the CEO's incentive, CEOs will not only look after the equity and the shareholders, but also look after the debt holders as well. And we also recommend long vesting period. Right now, most corporations in America, including Vector, have 2 or 3 years of a vesting period, which encourages CEOs to pump up the short-term stock price at the expense of the long-term values. So, but if they have longer period, vesting period of at least 5 years, they will tend to look after longer goals instead of a short-term goal. So I mentioned about the some recommendation and implementation on ethical, legal, and the financial ground. But in order to sustain these recommendation and implementation to stay longer, I think it is important to have a strong and healthy corporate culture. So first, we recommend a strong alignment between CEO and stakeholder. And second, both company and CEO should look after the long-term goals and long-term benefits. And lastly, there should be transparency in the CEO compensation package. So as Vasu mentioned, we are not talking about transparency on how much CEO makes, but how the CEO compensation package is structured and what kind of criteria are evaluated in that CEO compensation. So So just to recap, so we talk about the real ethical issue is not how much CEOs are making, but it is how the CEO compensations are structured. And we noticed that the current CEO compensation structure poses a great threat to some of the stakeholders' interests. So in order to prevent this issue and have the solution, we recommend and the CEO incentive and compensation to incorporate ESG, have a stricter performance and measurement, and that structure and the longer vesting period to reflect the all stakeholders. And thank you for listening our presentation. Now we are opening for the Q&A.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me start, and I said in an earlier piece already, I'll ask the first question, and I'll turn it over to the other judges. One of the earlier slides, I got stuck right there. Not a bad thing, but when you show that average CEO compensation increases from 3 to 6%. And I didn't see you show anywhere else in there what the average increase of compensation is for any of the other employees at any of the other levels. One of the things that has been a concern of mine as a board member is when we look at CEO compensation increasing 3 to 6%, the CEOs make 1.2 million. But down through the ranks, we will see first and second level managers and bargaining for employees being told that, well, the best increase you can get is 2%. Is there equity in a CEO getting 3 to 6% on $1 million salary and your baseline employees being told 2% across the board?
Thank you for the question. That's actually a very interesting point because typically, well, to give you a bit of background, it really depends on how the market is going. So we've spoken to a number of people who've been in recruitment, for example, even within the United States. As you mentioned, internally within organizations, it depends on the HR within the space that they're in. But you look at anything between 3 to 5%, or anything that goes along with the GDP of America at that specific stage, as to how, or the inflation rate, as to how a person at the same level increases. Now, with the CEO compensation, again, what we want to try and point out here that mathematically it's a bit different when you're looking at the median. You will always have opposite ends of the pole, which are there within that median as well, and vector falls into the higher end, which is our greater concern right now. So if we look at the overall aspect, yes, there's an ethical challenge which every company needs to face, but with vector specifically, because it's so skewed in favor of the CEO, especially with the growth of his salary within the last 5 years, it has a direct impact specifically on people within the lower level who are facing those same problems that you've already mentioned.
Are features such as say on pay or clawback something that is worth our consideration?
Well, again, so I'll take this because specifically say on pay, which is something that has already been brought about, it again ties up specifically with the stakeholder's ability or the number of votes that he has within the organization. Now, there have been a number of arguments that have been made in that minority stakeholders should have an equal say with majority stakeholders in whether or not what the compensation of the CEO should be. But again, we're of the belief that if every single person who's part of the organization as a shareholder has a certain voting right, which has already been assigned to them by the company earlier itself. Now, their duty is to eventually hire a board such as yourself that takes a fiduciary duty and a loyalty duty to the organization and takes the right decisions from there. I believe that you already have the best interests of the organization in mind. It's something that has been, this structure has continued since eons, and it's really been changing in the last 4 or 5 years as we've got more research into the efficacy of these compensation structures. And we're just trying to bring that to light here and try and make you a little bit more aware of how maybe a certain tweak here and there could make it a better systems for the longer term.
Okay, no, that's very helpful. And a little later, I want to ask about ESG as a Wow. But, when you put up your slide on the disparity between CEO and rank and file employee, and you did it geographically, and the US was the most generous, what confidence should I have that indeed across that spectrum, you're comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges? And by that I mean, is there a consistency to your methodology? Are we talking CEOs of just the Fortune 500 in the US, and what's the comparable group in other countries?
So to answer that question, it's a very good point purely because across different cultures and across different countries, again, you have different pay scales for everyone. But what you're doing is I wouldn't say that it's exactly apples to apples purely because when you look at the lower base, it's not as, for example, the CEO typically is the best performing candidate throughout his career. He usually has the highest credentials, has highest performance management. So they go up the organization a lot quicker. But when you look at the average pay of the workers, the baseline, you're typically looking at, you're looking at the best performers as well as you're looking at the lowest performer. So the lowest level, that doesn't work. But the apples to apples comparison really happens because you're looking at the ratio within the organization. So I'm not looking at, say, for example, a tobacco CEO versus a tech CEO. And their juniors. We're looking within the same industry and we're comparing between the ratios of those organizations. So it's exactly that. As to your comment about the size of the organizations, the analysis was actually done by Harvard. They looked at the top 500 organizations within the S&P 500, as well as within FTSE 250 and within different countries. They looked at the top 100 to 150 firms. I can't tell you exactly which ones they were, but I can share the report with you.
Well, if it's done by Harvard, you know it's right.
You have to trust someone.
I actually found the Spain part interesting because on that particular graphic, it was mostly the sort of highest performing economies, and plus Spain was sort of way out of whack. But so I have two questions. One is, and I may have missed this in the slide, so if I did, I apologize. How does the compensation of our CEO compare in terms of growth over the course of the last several years? So you had the graph up there about like a CEO from 2009 to 10 spiked 36% or something, and it leveled off.
Yeah.
What about our CEO? Where does he fit in there?
You answer that question.
I'm looking for the.
There we go. Yeah. Where does he fall in there?
So specifically about our CEO. So we're talking about the growth of the CEO salary within Vector.
Yeah, over the course of the last several years, has his salary grown exponentially or within that 3 to 6%?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about vectors, actually from year 2000, actually in year 2013, I believe, the payment for Harvard lower was something like 9.9 million. And the reason why it increased into 30 million is because at the year of 2015, the company granting 1.2 million shares, which equals to about 22 million US dollar, and to make sure that he will keep working for the company. And this is only because that he has a strong relationship and investment specialty in the real estate business, which I had mentioned is the Douglas element. And which means that the Victor Group has paid him a lot to make sure that he can keep working on this and expand on this on the real estate business. So in terms of the graphic, there is a big gap. And in terms of the relation why there is a gap, there is an investment. But why we say that the investment itself doesn't justify enough, it isn't justified enough, it's only because that the company itself is a tobacco company, and he just introduced some new other business, which is the value was previously unrecognized by the market. And only after this period it was recognized, and this become part of this business. However, it doesn't mean that the business can go long, grow fast enough and or in a longer term.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand,
Yeah.
so he would be far above that line generally over the All
Of course, there will be a gap here.
Okay. And then my other question is somewhat I'm really I'm just trying to figure out sort of how we fit in with other organizations. So you mentioned, and again, if I missed this, I apologize. You mentioned that kind of high CEO salaries generally can decrease morale, and I'm wondering if you have any basis for that, because the counter argument that I might make to that is, well, wait a second, it's not just CEOs that are paid substantially more, right? It's throughout the senior executive ranks. Shouldn't that actually motivate people because, hey, I want to get up to there? And so do you have any evidence, any studies or anything that should back that up?
So there was actually an empirical analysis that was done. Sorry, I'll just get out the report by Blasey and Cruz in 2003, Neil Mack in 2006. So what the report actually, the light that it put on was, I agree with you. I mean, I come from a corporate setup where I've always been motivated by the next person and my boss's salary and everything that they've gotten. But what we also need to understand is that society is not made up of completely one person. It's different personalities, it's different individuals that are there within the organization. There are a number of arguments to be made of what type of person you want within your culture. But especially within the tobacco industry, what we've noticed is, especially at the middle level and the lower level managers, their work is specifically less skilled than, say, what the CEO has to handle. He's looking at complexities across lobbyists, governments, regulations, as well as running a business which pretty much runs itself, which is run by the people at the lower level. But their jobs are fairly straightforward. Now, what this report had actually said was, due to these different personalities, there are different ways or forms of reference for how the CEO's pay can be viewed. Now, within organizations where there is steady work and steady businesses, or they're more brick and mortar in that sense, there's a higher chance, I think, if I'm not mistaken, there's about a 62% chance of lower level employees actually taking it as a negative that the CEO is receiving that much more.
Okay.
I think the mid-level managers were somewhere closer to 40. As you get higher up the rungs and they see their path really leading towards the CEOs, you can see that changing and that schematic changes. But especially when you're looking at the meat of the organization, because we're talking about a pyramid, of course, there's a lot of descent that happens.
Okay, I'm sorry, which one of these, it was the second one?
You're Mac in 2006
Okay.
specifically.
Thank you, okay.
One of the key takeaways from your analysis and your presentation is the need to incorporate ESG measures into the CEO calculation. Help me understand a little bit about that. Who defines what the parameters are of ESG? Are there accountability standards that you'd recommend that we use, or what direction? How do we operationalize that concept?
So we actually look at some of the companies with like a ESG or sustainability metrics they use at the moment. So the parameters that I mentioned, so for instance, the environment, like emission, carbon emission, and like a resource waste management. So those are commonly used in metrics that we found from the other companies as a kind of a reference. So in terms of the, I give you some like a percentage. That's based on the importance that we feel. So for instance, if you look at the environment, I give 40% on emission and then 60% about resource management. Is because that we feel that resource management is more linked. There's more relation into like tobacco company versus the carbon emission, and also the resource management. It is also tied to the financial or like reduction of the operating cost as well.
But who validates that? Is it done by the same accounting firm that does our traditional financial metrics, or is there an accountability standard that we self-measure against?
Yes, so it will be done by measured by the some sort of accounting authorities. So they look at the metrics and they validate the KPI along with the board of directors, which is from the corporate governance.
Okay.
So yes.
So may I have one point?
Sure.
So Thank you, John. The first I want to talk about is like, assume that we are board of directors here. So if we incorporate the ESG concept into our criteria to the payment, there are two ways are good for the company. The first is like we dilute the weight of the stock incentive to the CEO, means that the CEO will look at more than at more other things. The second is like it gave us as a board of directors some flexibility to talk about what is the real good to the company. And another point is that besides the board of directors, I believe nowadays a lot of accounting firms actually they are discussing about shall we talk about ESG besides our traditional auditing job. That's what I want to add. Thank you.
So I have another question. So we talked a little bit about ESG and these are, you looked at it, you mentioned only 7% of companies are currently linking CEO salary to ESG, but this information comes from those companies that you looked at, right? What about the tying it to, instead of equity to corporate debt and bonds? What percentage of companies are currently doing that?
For the percentage, I don't have that number.
Okay.
I don't have the exact number. What percentage of companies are that have their like CEO compensation linking to that? But we found some papers that not many companies or like small number. I mean, actually, virtually no companies that link the that or a corporate bond into the CEO compensation package, and so that's one of the reasons why the CEOs are more driven to a risk-taking behavior.
So we would be a real outlier if we did that.
It would be a new concept. So what we're trying to do is, if you look at traditional finance theory, there's always an agency problem that happens, specifically when it comes to equity stakeholder interest versus debt holder interest. I mean, if there's a project that the person is looking at where it's a zero-sum game for the equity stakeholder, but there's a negative for the debt, they'll still try to take it on. Specifically within the firm, what we see is that we have very low debt on the table at the moment. What we're trying to ensure is, especially as he gets into new projects and we start to diversify, which is what the CEO has currently started to do, he becomes a little more aware of how that directly affects the costs of the firm. So if we look at the WACC of the firm, you're going to be looking at not just the cost of debt, but also the cost of equity. Now, we can look at M&M theory where essentially the cost of the debt increasing should be foreseen within the cost of equity, but we know that the markets aren't playing out as they should. So the CEO really needs to take that into consideration. We agree, it's an extreme step. It's also something that's really been talked about theoretically. But what we're trying to do is we're just trying to diversify from that equity stake, which can lead to so many, well, let's say ethical corners where they have to take a decision which could eventually affect the firm negatively. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to break that down. We're trying to make sure that the CEO has multiple fronts that he needs to consider before he takes a decision, and especially those that have long-term benefits as opposed to short-term benefits.
Some people would argue that, using the term oxymoronic, for a tobacco company to talk about ethics.
We see it in CSG. Exactly. I wrote that down.
One of the challenges is finding geographic markets that are most amenable to our product and our service. There is a trend away from selling cigarettes or tobacco products in so-called Western economies and go where the money is and the appetite is, such as Asian markets. What's your reaction to that? And how do we factor that into ESG analyses?
If we speak about specifically the market, now you will absolutely point out the fact, which is that certain people may consider what the tobacco industry does as unethical. But as far as we see, we look at it more as a utilitarian system, where if the person has the capability or has a wish to smoke, and there's a legal structure for them to do so, we are within the confines of the law and we're acting as a business within those confines. Now, as to where the markets are, we've already discussed this with regards to how the CEO is trying to diversify his market, especially within the e-cigarette market here within the States. But also, try and look at different avenues that he can explore globally. Now, as a business decision, I would agree that Southeast Asia is probably the biggest market right now. If you look at Philip Morris and you look at British American Tobacco, most of their investments have been there. But if you look at ESG specifically, there's a huge opportunity for us, even though we enter these markets where it's still relatively, I would say, nascent with regards to how foreign organizations are entering those zones. If you look at tobacco production, for example, say in India or in Indonesia, the level of the workers as well as the pay of the workers is substantially lower. Now, if you as an organization can enter those markets with a positive light, I mean, we're talking about incorporating all of these differences, making you different from a Philip Morris, making you different from British American Tobacco. You not only enter that market in a positive light to the government regulators as well as society there, but you also create a foothold for a market that keeps on expanding. So it's actually an opportunity more than it is a negative.
If not, I will finish with one.
Okay.
All about, or I think all about corporations in America have usually have the independent auditors to, do the audit and give you the audit report and all. Should we be concerned as a board of directors that our board compensation committee that sets the CEO's compensation could very possibly be viewed as not independent? Because in setting that compensation for him, you gotta remember, we're on the board together. We brothers, we look out for each other. Because I'm the on this board, and you make this, and just how comfortable should we be with that in terms of independence? And this goes back to the, I think, as you all have mentioned, Enron, the old Enron days of fiduciary responsibility. To date, nobody's gone to jail for failing to carry out their fiduciary responsibilities.
Yep.
And I'll stop at that.
So you're putting me in a very tight spot because I don't want to, ruffle any feathers of the board here in terms of your integrity. But the major point that we would like to make here is that there are no fingers being pointed with regards to the ethical or integrity of anyone that's on the compensation committee. As far as we're concerned, Vector Group has taken all stands, both legal and ethical, in having an independent compensation committee look at the CEO's compensation. Whether you feel that that's enough, I would leave that decision up to you. But what I would answer to your question specifically is that what we're proposing here really allows for these situations not to happen, where you see a spike of 210% purely because of something that's outside of the control of A, the individual, B, going into markets which might not necessarily be fair, and 3, it's an archaic system compared to what's really happening in the world today. You've got to move ahead with the times. It's something that needs to be considered very seriously by the board today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job, that was very skillful. All right, let me just stop this and clear it. And as feedback, I thought you all had a really tough topic. It's one that I'm certain that can be viewed very passionately depending on who and what level you're talking to. But I think you handled it very well, and I think you made some very good recommendations to us. I applaud you on your professionalism. You've done a lot of work. You've dug really deep into some of these things and telling us how other studies and all have come to this point. And I think you looked at our situation in that as a very objective body, and I thought that was very good.
I will add to that the fact that of the various sessions that I could have signed up for, this was the one that grabbed me because I think it's a fascinating topic, an extremely important one. It's always good for a news article. Just
Or an election cycle.
Oh, absolutely. And it's important to move beyond the rabble-rousing or the cliches. It's a tough issue. And I think that you addressed it in a very measured way. First, a word about style. I thought you all came across as very knowledgeable, competent people who could speak credibly. That's good. I'm going to make a couple of criticisms about the slides. I have a thing about exclamation points. I don't think they belong. It's nothing to mark down on. It's just know your audience, and I don't like exclamation points because I read them as like high volume. You're raising your voice to me.
You would not like my emails then.
But otherwise, your persona is developed. We're all very good. A couple of times, one or two of you may have. I felt you were speaking to the slides when in fact you always speak to your audience, but that's something that we all can easily fall into. On the substantive side, I think you covered a very broad spectrum of angles, and the ethics piece of this is frankly, I think, the toughest piece. That doesn't necessarily lend itself to right or wrong, which, by the way, in my view, is the essence of an ethical quandary. There's no right or wrong answer. It's really important to do it thoughtfully, in a measured way, and I think you at least conveyed to me as a member of the executive board the scope of that undertaking. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I also thought you guys did very well. And to your point, sort of no hysteria, it was all kind of fact-based, which is why I was probing a little bit on some of those points, which was good. One, and I don't want to use the word criticism, piece of constructive feedback. First of all, everybody, I do public presentations a lot, and sometimes I'm great, and sometimes I'm not, and you always have things you can work on. Eye contact is really important. Eye contact with everyone that you're addressing. So that's the one thing, as I watched you guys doing, that I would just be cognizant of that. But otherwise, I thought you did a really good job, and I too was drawn to this particular topic because it's a big topic right now in the United States generally, and I have some of my own personal opinions on it. So I thought you guys did a nice job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.